Eleanor approached the notary's office with suspicion gnawing at her. She suspected her husband and his mistress would be there, but what she couldn't fathom was why her mother-in-law had included her in the will after despising her for so long. As the notary produced the document and began to read, the atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, there was no room for mockery. Hello, dear ones. Set aside your tasks for a moment. I want to share a story that will make you see your loved ones in a different light. We're grateful you're here with us. We wish you a pleasant experience. In the notary's waiting room, the air was cool despite the oppressive July heat outside. The air conditioner hummed softly, circulating the stale air. Eleanor Matthews adjusted the collar of her only respectable dress for the third time, a navy blue piece with delicate silver trim she'd purchased 5 years ago for Nathan's graduation. For what felt like the 100th time in the past half hour, she glanced at her watch, an old Casio with a frayed strap, a gift from her mother when she graduated from teacher's college. The minute hand crept relentlessly toward noon. The other heirs would arrive any moment, and the thought constricted her chest. The waiting room was empty except for the receptionist behind the glass partition, typing intently and occasionally casting curious glances in Eleanor's direction. From the back hallway came muffled voices, the rustling of papers, the ringing of a telephone, the ordinary sounds of a notary's office to which Eleanor felt entirely foreign. Why am I even here? She thought for the 100th time, nervously fidgeting with the worn strap of her brown clearance handbag she'd bought 3 years ago. She recalled the moment she'd received the official letter, summoning her to the reading of the will. The thick envelope bearing the notary's embossed logo had looked so out of place among the utility bills and school circulars that Eleanor initially thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. The envelope clearly stated Matthews Eleanor, hand delivery. At home, when she showed it to Nathan, he'd merely laughed. I'm sure Mother decided to leave you her old dresser as one final punishment, he mocked, sipping tequila from the crystal tumbler Catherine had given him for his last birthday, or that turquoise ring she never wore. What do you think it's worth, darling? $100? Maybe $200? He'd laughed again as he dialed a number on his phone. Eleanor listened as he recounted the story to Veronica, his laughter echoing through the room. Can you imagine? She even included her. I suppose Mother wanted one last bit of entertainment. In life, Catherine had never missed an opportunity to remind Eleanor that she was unworthy of her precious son, a mere history teacher, without connections, without status, from an ordinary family. A burden on our family, her mother-in-law would say with such disdain, as if Eleanor were some street urchin and not an educator with 20 years of experience, award-winning and professionally recognized. The worst part was hearing it in front of her husband, who would simply nod in silent agreement with his mother. Eleanor sighed, smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her dress, and pulled out a small compact mirror from her bag, another heirloom from her grandmother. She stared back at a 45-year-old woman with carefully combed brown hair, showing the first threads of gray, fine lines around her gray eyes, and lips pressed tightly together. When did I become so old? She thought fleetingly, but pushed the thought away immediately. This was no time for regrets. Behind her, a door opened, and the sharp click of heels on marble floor announced a familiar presence. Eleanor straightened instinctively, recognizing that gait. Only a woman from Nathan's circle walked like that. You're here too? Expecting a handout? Came a mocking voice. Eleanor turned slowly. In the doorway stood Nathan, immaculate as always in a charcoal 3-piece suit, perfectly knotted tie, and the cufflinks his mother had given him for his 40th birthday. The years had been generous to him. At 47, he still cut a handsome figure if one overlooked the developing paunch and the receding hairline he disguised with carefully styled hair. Beside him, clinging like a shadow, was Veronica, a polished 35-year-old blonde who had been the late Catherine's personal assistant and was now Nathan's official mistress. She wore a form-fitting ivory dress, Italian designer heels, and oversized gold earrings with large pearls, an expensive gift from Catherine last Women's Day. Eleanor remembered that occasion vividly, a family dinner at her mother-in-law's estate, Catherine presenting the earrings to her indispensable assistant in a theatrical manner, while Eleanor received a routine box of assorted chocolates. "I remember you always loved these," Catherine had said with subtle irony. The cruel joke was that Eleanor had been allergic to nougat candies since childhood, and Catherine knew this perfectly well. "I was invited," Eleanor replied calmly, trying to keep her voice steady. She refused to show how much the couple's arrogance wounded her. After 15 years of marriage, she'd grown accustomed to the humiliation. "Come now, don't be dramatic," Nathan said, moving closer. He smelled of expensive cologne and something else. Power, the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. In 15 years, Eleanor had never grown used to that smell. Mother probably included you out of pity. Perhaps she left you her old china set or a glass vase. He burst out laughing, and Veronica immediately echoed him like an obedient chorus. Her laughter sounded like the clinking of bright but hollow crystal. Eleanor remembered when she'd fallen in love with Nathan. Young, ambitious, freshly graduated in economics, son of a renowned businesswoman. He'd seemed like every girl's dream. Handsome, intelligent, with a brilliant future. Back then, his confidence had seemed like strength. Now, however, behind that mask, she saw only emptiness and cruelty. "Nathan," Eleanor said quietly, meeting his eyes directly, "I'm not demanding anything. I'm here because I respect your mother's final wishes." She tried to speak firmly, but a lump formed in her throat. "Oh, please," Veronica interjected, adjusting her impeccable hair, not a single strand out of place. "We all know Catherine never thought much of you." She was interrupted by the sound of another door opening. In the threshold appeared Harrison Caldwell, a distinguished man of about 60, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, charcoal suit, and thin-framed glasses. The notary and longtime family friend, he was one of the few who remembered Catherine when she was just starting her business during the difficult years of the 1990s crisis. "I ask everyone to come in, please," he said in an official tone, scanning those present with his gaze. When his eyes fell on Eleanor, she thought she detected a flash of compassion, though perhaps it was only her imagination. Eleanor smoothed her hair and dress one final time. She felt utterly out of place among these people accustomed to luxury and abundance. Her simple high school history teacher's outfit contrasted starkly with the designer ensembles of Veronica and the other family members. She entered last, her legs trembling slightly. The conference room was grand with high ceilings and heavy curtains at the windows, a solid mahogany desk, leather armchairs, gilt-framed paintings. Everything spoke of stability and wealth. Eleanor couldn't help but compare it to the cramped teacher's lounge at her school with its peeling paint and wobbly chairs. The other members of the Matthews family were already assembled. Victoria Sterling, Nathan's older sister, a refined 50-year-old woman with the same haughty posture and penetrating gaze as her mother, sat beside her husband, a corpulent, balding man who owned a chain of pharmacies. Next to them was the younger brother, Marcus, an art conservator who had chosen an artistic career against his mother's wishes. He was the only one who nodded to Eleanor with a slight smile. In 15 years, he'd been the only one to treat her with basic human decency, perhaps because he too felt like an outsider in a family obsessed with status and money. Eleanor took a seat in the farthest corner, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. She remembered the first time she'd entered the Matthews estate, a young bride full of hope for a happy future. Catherine had looked her up and down with that penetrating gaze, then looked away as if she'd seen nothing of interest. From that moment, their relationship had been defined. "Since everyone is present," the notary began, unfolding papers on the table, "let's proceed with reading Catherine Matthews' will." Nathan sank into his chair, draping his arm across the back of Veronica's seat. He looked supremely confident, as if he already considered all of his mother's inheritance firmly in his grasp. In recent years, he'd practically run his mother's business while she spent more time traveling or receiving treatment in Europe. It was obvious to everyone that the eldest son was the natural heir to the empire Catherine had built. I, Catherine Matthews, being in full possession of my mental faculties and with complete clarity, the notary began with the required formula. Suddenly, Eleanor vividly remembered her last conversation with her mother-in-law, which had taken place a month before Catherine's death. Catherine had surprised her in the small workshop in the basement of the estate, where the family spent weekends. Eleanor had been attempting to restore an old wooden box she'd inherited from her grandmother, darkened by time with mother-of-pearl inlay and a stubborn lock. She'd been bent over her work, cleaning the relief with a fine brush, and hadn't heard the door open. "So this is what you do with your time while everyone else thinks you're cooking or grading papers," Catherine had said. Eleanor had jumped, nearly ruining her work. She'd expected the usual criticism, but for the first time, Catherine's voice didn't carry contempt. It held something resembling interest. Catherine had approached, leaned over the small box, and examined the delicate work up close. "Where did you learn this?" she'd asked. Surprised by this sudden interest, Eleanor had told her about her carpenter grandfather who'd taught her to work with wood since childhood, about the restoration courses she'd secretly taken at night a few years ago, about her dream of one day opening a small workshop. Catherine had listened silently, observing the other objects Eleanor had already restored: an old sideboard in the corner, a picture frame, a sewing box. Then she'd suddenly asked, "And why did you never speak about this?" "Because you wouldn't have approved anyway," Eleanor had answered honestly. A strange expression had appeared on her mother-in-law's face, impossible to tell if it was surprise or regret. That day, Catherine had looked at her differently for the first time. A week later, she'd been admitted to the hospital with a stroke from which she never recovered. Eleanor had visited several times, but her mother-in-law had never regained consciousness. Now, listening to the notary's monotonous voice enumerating properties, accounts, and shares being distributed to Catherine's children, grandchildren, and distant relatives, Eleanor could think of only one thing. Why did Catherine include me in the will? Was it truly just to humiliate her one final time in front of the entire family by leaving her some trinket out of pity, as Nathan had suggested? She glanced cautiously at those present. Victoria whispered something to her husband, occasionally shooting Eleanor looks full of displeasure. Marcus gazed distractedly out the window, as if none of this concerned him. Nathan caressed Veronica's wrist without hiding their relationship, not even in such a formal situation. Veronica smiled smugly, as if she already envisioned herself as mistress of the Matthews estate. Then the notary's voice grew louder, bringing Eleanor back to reality. We now move to the principal portion of the estate, the controlling shares of Matthews and Heritage, the antique store chain. Nathan leaned forward, a predatory smile drawn across his face. Veronica placed her hand on his knee, squeezing in anticipation. Victoria stopped whispering and tensed. Even Marcus looked away from the landscape and turned toward the notary. Harrison Caldwell cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and looking at the documents continued. 30% of the shares of Matthews and Heritage pass into absolute ownership too. The notary paused and looked over his glasses at those present. Eleanor Matthews. A silence fell in the office so dense that Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. The seconds stretched into eternity. She held her breath, not believing what she was hearing. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding, or a cruel joke from her mother-in-law. Nathan sat with his mouth hanging open. Veronica turned pale, almost merging with her ivory dress. Victoria let out a strangled sound, like a squeal, while her husband nervously adjusted his tie knot. Only Marcus looked at Eleanor with a half smile, as if none of this surprised him. "This is a mistake," Nathan broke the silence first, his voice hoarse, as if short of breath. Mother couldn't have. It's impossible. Harrison Caldwell calmly adjusted his glasses. No mistake, Nathan. I drafted this document personally, following your mother's explicit instructions. She was fully lucid and in possession of all her faculties. But this is absurd. Nathan stood, his face flushing crimson. 30%, a third of the business. To her? He pointed at Eleanor as if she were an object, a woman who understands nothing about antiques or business, a teacher who can't even afford to buy herself a decent dress. Eleanor remained seated, clutching the armrests of her chair. It felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She was certain she'd misheard. 30% of the shares. Catherine, who in life had barely acknowledged her existence, had left her a third of her business, the pride of her life, the work she'd built from scratch during impossibly difficult times. I ask everyone to remain calm, the notary intervened. I haven't finished yet. Nathan fell back into his chair, opening and closing his fists. The cufflinks gleamed in the light from the desk lamp. Veronica was whispering something in his ear, but he didn't seem to be listening. Victoria and her husband exchanged bewildered glances. Marcus watched Eleanor with a barely perceptible smile, as if he knew something the others didn't. 19% of the shares, the notary continued, go to Nathan Matthews with the condition that... He paused, and Eleanor noticed his fingers trembled slightly. Whatever this was, the will made even an experienced attorney uncomfortable. With the condition that he remain in a legal marriage with Eleanor for at least 5 years from the reading of this will. In case of divorce or separation during that period, these shares will be transferred to a special fund supporting young restoration professionals, founded in memory of Catherine Matthews. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor watched as Nathan's face first turned white, then became covered with red blotches. Veronica looked as if someone had struck her in the stomach. "This is illegal," Nathan shouted, rising to his feet again. "She can't control my personal life from the grave. I'm going to contest this will. You have no right, Harrison." "Yes, I do, Nathan," Caldwell replied calmly. "But I must warn you that your mother anticipated that possibility. In case of challenge by any heir, all assets corresponding to that person automatically transfer to the aforementioned fund." "But why?" Eleanor suddenly asked, surprised at having dared to speak. Why did she do this? The notary looked at her with unexpected warmth. Catherine left a video message. She asked that we show it after reading the main points of the will. Harrison Caldwell rose from the table, approached the wall where a large television hung, and turned it on with the remote control. For a few seconds, the screen remained black. Then Catherine's image appeared. Eleanor shuddered involuntarily. Her mother-in-law already looked ill, but she still retained her majestic bearing. She sat in her favorite chair in the library of the estate, surrounded by books and antique objects she'd collected throughout her life. She wore a navy dress and a pearl necklace. Eleanor remembered that outfit. Her mother-in-law had worn it to every important family event. "If you're watching this video, it means I'm no longer here." Catherine's voice sounded slightly more subdued than in life, but just as authoritative. "And I suppose all of you are in shock over my will." She smiled slightly, and in that smile, Eleanor perceived something new and unknown. Perhaps sadness, perhaps regret. Nathan and Eleanor must be especially surprised. Catherine leaned forward slightly, looking straight at the camera. "Nathan, I know you're certain you should receive the controlling package. You always considered yourself the only worthy heir to the business. But, my son, you never understood the true value of what I created." She paused, arranged the pearls around her neck, a gesture Eleanor had seen hundreds of times during the years of marriage, a habit that betrayed the nerves of the normally imperturbable Catherine Matthews. Matthews and Heritage is not just a chain of stores. It's history. It's art. It's preserving beauty for future generations. and you only ever saw money and status in it. Eleanor glanced sideways at Nathan. He sat clutching the armrests until his knuckles turned white, staring at the screen with a mixture of anger, bewilderment, and something else, fear. And now you, Eleanor. Catherine's head on the screen turned slightly, and Eleanor flinched when she heard her name. For 15 years, I've watched you endure my son's disdain, his infidelities, his selfishness. 15 years you've carried the Matthews name with dignity, though we weren't always fair to you. Eleanor felt a lump forming in her throat. Those words, the first acknowledgement from her mother-in-law in so many years, sounded especially bitter now that Catherine was gone. But it's not just that, her mother-in-law continued. A month ago, I saw your work by chance. Your hands, Eleanor, they're the hands of a true restorer. You have something that money can't buy and talent can't inherit. Genuine love for the antique, for history. In the office, silence reigned such that Eleanor could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Everyone was looking at her from the screen as if seeing her for the first time. You know? Catherine smiled suddenly on the screen, and that smile transformed her usually stern face. I, too, once dreamed of becoming a restorer. As a young woman, I studied at an art school, restoring antique furniture. Then I married Richard, had children, and my husband convinced me it wasn't serious. That status and social position were more important than a simple carpentry workshop. She sighed deeply, and Eleanor saw the shadow of old pain pass across her face. I listened to him. I opened my first antique shop, then the second, then the third. I built an empire. But you know what I understood at the end of my life? I betrayed my dream, and that is my greatest regret. Eleanor felt a tear slip down her cheek. She'd never imagined that the authoritarian, always confident Catherine could have harbored the same dreams and doubts as herself. When I saw you working with that little box, Catherine gently shook her head on screen. I saw myself, young, full of dreams, and I decided that at least you shouldn't betray your gift. That's why 30% of the shares are yours, with no strings attached. That will give you financial independence and the possibility of dedicating yourself to what you love. She rearranged the pearls again. That nervous gesture Eleanor recognized all too well. As for the 19% for Nathan, yes, that condition may seem strange or even cruel, but it's my way of giving both of you a chance. You, Eleanor, to find yourself, to discover your strength, to not fear change. And you, Nathan, to finally become a real man, to learn to value what you have. Catherine on the screen stood, and there reappeared that imposing businesswoman everyone knew. The remaining shares are distributed among Victoria, Marcus, and their children, as indicated in the will. But remember, only together can you make key decisions about the company's future. I hope this teaches you to listen to each other and find compromise. She remained silent as if gathering her strength. And lastly, Eleanor. In Harrison's safe, there's an envelope just for you. Read it when you're alone. The video ended. The screen went dark. In the office, a heavy silence fell. Eleanor sat stunned. It all seemed like a strange dream. 30% of the company's shares, financial independence, a mother-in-law who actually saw her not as an unsuitable daughter-in-law, but as a kindred spirit. None of it made sense. I don't believe a single word, Nathan finally blurted out, breaking the silence. His voice shook with suppressed fury. Mother wasn't in her right mind. Someone took advantage of her. She tricked her. She couldn't have done this to me. He almost shouted the last words. Nathan, the notary replied calmly, your mother underwent a complete medical evaluation before drafting the will. 2 independent doctors confirmed her legal capacity. The will is impeccably drafted, meeting all formalities. You, of course, have the right to challenge it in court, but as I said, yes, I remember, Nathan replied bitterly. If I challenge it, I get nothing. Perfect blackmail. He turned to Eleanor with eyes burning with hatred. "You turned her against me. You manipulated a sick old woman." "Nathan," Eleanor said in a low voice, holding his gaze, "you know that's not true. Don't you dare tell me what's true and what's not," he shouted, standing. 15 years I put up with you in my house. I fed you, clothed you, allowed you to live like a person. And you were just waiting for the right moment to stab me in the back." "Nathan," the notary intervened, "I ask you to control your emotions. We're all civilized people here." Nathan gave a bitter laugh. "My wife and my mother conspired behind my back to leave me without an inheritance, and you ask for civility." "Nobody left you without an inheritance," said Marcus, who until then had remained silent. "You're going to get your 19%, only on one condition." "A condition?" Nathan turned sharply to his brother. "Living with her for 5 more years?" He pointed at Eleanor with his finger. "You must be joking. Or get divorced and give up the shares." Marcus shrugged. "The decision is yours." "Decision?" Nathan laughed nervously. What an incredible decision. Either 5 years of pretending to be the happy husband of, he trailed off at the notary's warning look, or lose my part of the business. He looked around at everyone present. "And all of you are part of this. Even you, Victoria." Victoria flinched at the sound of her name. "I didn't know anything, Nathan," she said, wringing a handkerchief in her hands. "I swear Mother didn't tell me about her plans. The only one who knew was me," Marcus said calmly. "Mother consulted me before changing the will. And you know what? I fully supported her." "Damn you," Nathan took a step toward his brother, but Harrison Caldwell stepped between them. "Gentlemen, please," he said firmly. "Let's conclude the official part. All necessary documents are ready to be signed. Then you can discuss the situation in a more relaxed atmosphere." Nathan silently returned to his seat, his face a stone mask. Veronica put her hand on his shoulder, but he pushed it away with a gesture full of irritation. The next hour passed in formalities, signing documents, explanations of legal technicalities, questions about taxes and transfers of rights. Eleanor signed the papers mechanically, without fully understanding what was happening. It seemed as though she were watching everything from outside, as if it weren't happening to her. Finally, when the formalities were resolved, the notary handed her a sealed envelope. "For you, from Catherine," he said in a low voice. Eleanor took the envelope with trembling hands. On it, in her mother-in-law's neat handwriting, was written, "Eleanor, open when you're alone." "What other secrets?" Nathan muttered, noticing the envelope. "What's in there?" "Another surprise?" "Nathan," the notary said wearily, "it's a personal letter from your mother to your wife. I ask you to respect Catherine's final wishes." Nathan wanted to say something in response, but suddenly collapsed, as if all the air had been taken out of him. He no longer looked like an imposing businessman, but a confused, aging man with the ground disappearing beneath his feet. Victoria and her husband said goodbye in low voices and left, avoiding looking at Eleanor. Marcus, as he passed by, gently squeezed her shoulder and whispered, "Call me later." Veronica stood to one side with an inscrutable expression, as if assessing the situation and calculating scenarios. When everyone had left the office, only Eleanor, Nathan, and the notary remained. Eleanor, Harrison Caldwell said, "Permit me to reiterate my condolences on Catherine's passing. If you have any questions about asset administration or any legal matter, I'm at your disposal." "Thank you," Eleanor replied in a low voice, still clutching the envelope. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to speak with Nathan alone. We still have a few technical points to address." Eleanor nodded and headed for the door. As she passed Nathan, he suddenly grabbed her hand. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll find a way to fix this. Don't think you've won." Eleanor freed her hand and looked him straight in the eyes. "I never considered our life a competition, Nathan. I just wanted to be happy. Too bad you never understood that." She left the office, feeling her husband's heavy gaze fixed on her back. In the hallway, Veronica called her. "Eleanor, wait." Eleanor stopped in surprise. In all those years, Veronica had almost never spoken to her directly, only teasing and mocking her in front of Nathan or Catherine. "I want you to know." Veronica came closer and lowered her voice. "My thing with Nathan is serious. We love each other." Eleanor raised her eyebrows slightly. Was Veronica really naive enough to believe in Nathan's love? "I'm happy for you," she said in an even tone. "I was thinking of filing for divorce," Veronica continued, nervously fiddling with the strap of her bag. "We were planning to get married, but now that will ruin everything." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said sincerely. She truly didn't wish harm on Nathan or even Veronica. But the decision is Nathan's. If he truly loves you more than the 19% of the shares, he'll choose you. Veronica flinched as if Eleanor had slapped her. Doubt flashed in her eyes. Apparently, she herself wasn't sure that Nathan preferred her to money. "It's not fair," she said at last. "It's blackmail, perhaps," Eleanor admitted, "but at least now you'll know what's most important to him." She turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Veronica bewildered. Stepping out onto the street, Eleanor took a deep breath of the warm summer air. For the first time in 15 years, she felt truly free. Whatever happened, whatever came next, her life would never be the same. Eleanor walked through the familiar streets, turning corners from memory, but without seeing the people, the shop windows, or even the weather. Her mind was in turmoil. The facts of the last few hours didn't fit into her usual world. The envelope she clutched in her hand seemed both light and heavy as stone. She only stopped in front of the door of the small cafe Memories, the place where she liked to come after work to have a cup of coffee and correct notebooks in peace. The retro-style interior with photos in black and white on the walls, an old jukebox in the corner, and mismatched chairs created a cozy atmosphere that was so lacking at home. "It's been a while since you came." The usual. Rosa, the older waitress who had been working there since it opened, greeted her with joy. "Yes, thanks, Rosa." Eleanor tried to smile, but it came out forced. She went to her favorite table in the corner, away from windows and prying eyes. Rosa, with decades of experience in caring for the public since the crisis of the 80s, had that special nose to read the mood of customers. When taking the order, she didn't pester her with talk, just patted her encouragingly on the shoulder and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Eleanor put the envelope on the table and looked at it for a long time without daring to open it. What would be inside? Another joke, an explanation, or something to turn her life upside down again? Finally, after a deep breath, she carefully tore the edge. Inside was a sheet of paper, folded in two and a key. A common metal key with a plastic tag bearing an address in the downtown area. Eleanor unfolded the letter. Catherine's handwriting was as clear and firm as she was. "Dear Eleanor, if you are reading this letter, it means that my will has already been read, and you know about your part in the business. You're probably surprised and confused, maybe even scared. It's natural. I was never fair to you. For 15 years, I only saw in you the wrong partner for my son, a girl outside our circle with no money or connections. I was blind and foolish. Too late, I saw in you a kindred spirit. When I saw you working with that old box, it was like looking back at my younger self. You have the same gestures, the same attention to detail, the same love for the antique that I had, until I traded it for status and money. The key you have in your hand is for a workshop on Riverside Street, number 23. I bought it a few years ago as an investment, but I never decided what to do with it. Now it's yours. A fully equipped workshop for furniture restoration and art objects. It has everything you need: tools, materials, special lighting. I consulted the best specialists to gather what a true restorer might need. Consider this my apology for all the years of contempt, and also a gift. The opportunity to realize the dream that I myself betrayed. As for Nathan, I know my son. He's spoiled, selfish, and has never truly valued you or even his mother. Everything came too easily to him. I blame myself for that. I allowed him to grow up like this, but I also know that deep down, he is capable of more. Maybe now, when he has to fight for what he believed was rightfully his, he'll finally mature. From you, Eleanor, I want to tell you, don't be afraid of change. You're stronger than you think. You endured 15 years in our family. That speaks to incredible strength of spirit. You now have financial independence and the opportunity to start a new life, with or without Nathan. The choice is yours. Postscript. Check the top drawer of the dresser in the workshop. There's something there that will help you understand why I did what I did. With respect and repentance, Catherine Matthews. Eleanor read the letter twice without believing what she saw. It all seemed unreal. Financial independence, a workshop of her own, recognition, and even a kind of apology from the woman who had always looked down on her. She took a sip of the now cold coffee, trying to gather her thoughts. The key lay on the table, shining in the lamplight like a promise of new life. Eleanor took it, turned it between her fingers, and ran her fingertip over the metal teeth. Riverside Street, 23. She knew that address. An old building from the early 20th century in the historic center of the city, with moldings on the facade and high ceilings. What's in that top drawer, she thought, and curiosity overcame confusion. After paying and thanking Rosa, Eleanor left the cafe and walked to the bus stop. Riverside Street was just a few stops away. The city continued its usual summer life. Mothers with children hurried to the park. Old people on benches chatted about the latest news. Young people laughed out loud in front of trendy cafes. An ordinary day when Eleanor Matthews' world had turned upside down. The bus, old and creaky on the curves, was almost empty at that hour. Eleanor sat by the window, watching the streets of her childhood pass one after another. There she had grown up. There she had known Nathan. She had spent her whole life there. But now she felt she saw everything with different eyes. Riverside Street. 23 turned out to be exactly as she remembered it. A 5-story building from the early 20th century, with an elegant facade restored a few years ago. On the ground floor there were shops, an antique shop, a second-hand bookstore, and a small cafe. Eleanor looked for a separate entrance and discovered a discreet door between the antique shop and the bookstore. The key fit perfectly. The door opened without a sound, as if the hinges were often greased. There was a small hall and a staircase leading to the second floor. Eleanor ascended, noticing that the steps didn't creak and the banister was polished from so much use. Upstairs, another solid wooden door with a lion-shaped knob awaited her. The second key on the key ring also fit there. Eleanor entered and froze on the threshold, unable to believe what she saw. Before her lay a large space with high ceilings and large windows through which sunlight entered. But what took her breath away was how it was furnished. In the center, a huge workbench surrounded by shelves with tools, from screwdrivers and chisels to specialized restoration instruments whose names Eleanor only knew from professional magazines. Against the wall, a long bench with clamps and dozens of drawers. In one corner, cabinets full of jars and bottles that, according to the labels, contained varnishes, paints, dyes, and other materials. Everything was new, shiny, arranged with meticulous precision. Catherine had not exaggerated. There really was everything a restorer could dream of. At the other end, Eleanor saw something that made her heart sink. An antique secretary desk, identical to the one her grandfather had in his study, only of better quality. Beside it, an elegant sideboard with bronze fittings and marble top. Eleanor slowly approached the sideboard, remembering the postscript of the letter. The top drawer opened easily, as if inviting her to look inside. There was an old photo framed and a small album. In the photo, there was a very young Catherine, as Eleanor had never seen her before. A girl in her 20s in a simple dress, smiling next to a workbench and holding a tool. Her face radiated happiness and pride. On the back, it read, Catherine Whitmore, Restoration Studio, 1976. Eleanor carefully opened the album. On the first page, with neat handwriting, it said, "My work." Then there were photos of restored furniture, chairs, tables, boxes, each with a date and a brief description. The last entry was dated 1982, the year Catherine married Richard Matthews. Under the album was another envelope, this time without an inscription. Inside, Eleanor found an old newspaper clipping from Arts and Culture, titled Young Talents in the Restoration Industry. Pictured in black and white, the same young Catherine received an award. The article spoke of a promising graduate of the Restoration School who was predicted to have a great future. A future that never happened. A future that Catherine traded for an advantageous marriage and social status. Eleanor carefully arranged everything back into the drawer and closed it. Now she understood her mother-in-law much better. Behind the coldness and arrogance hid a woman who once betrayed her dream and regretted it all her life. A woman who had seen in her daughter-in-law, whom she never loved, a reflection of her young self, and decided to give her the opportunity that she didn't give herself. Eleanor slowly walked around the workshop, running her hand over the tools, opening cabinets, looking through materials catalogs. Everything was thought out down to the smallest detail. Ventilation, lighting, even a small kitchenette with kettle and microwave in the corner. She walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. From there you could see the old part with the domes of the churches and the roofs of the historic buildings. A perfect view for a restorer. Suddenly she noticed her cell phone screen. It showed 7 missed calls from Nathan and 3 from Marcus. She hesitated for a moment, then turned off the sound with decision. Today she wanted to be alone, to process what had happened and decide what to do next. She sat down in an armchair next to the window, watching the sunlight play on the polished surface of the antique table. For the first time in many years, she felt no fear of the future, but anticipation, as if the long winter had ended and she was standing at the edge of spring. She took a small notebook out of her bag, the same one she always carried with her, and began jotting down ideas for the workshop. What services could she offer? What furniture did she want to restore first? Where to look for clients? Her handwriting became firmer and the list longer. An hour later, when the last ray of sunlight slipped down the wall, Eleanor realized she was smiling. Really smiling, like she hadn't smiled in a long time. She stood up, took one last look around at the workshop, now her workshop, and headed resolutely for the door. It was time to go home and face the new reality. But first, she dialed Marcus's number. "Hello," she said when he answered. "Can you talk?" "Valeria," Marcus replied, using her middle name as he always did. I was finally starting to worry. "How are you?" "It's hard to explain," she admitted. "Everything happened so suddenly, but, I think I'm okay." "Better than okay." "I'm glad to hear it." Marcus's voice conveyed genuine warmth. "Nathan is out of his mind. He called me. He threatened me with lawsuits, lawyers, the same as always." "I didn't answer his calls," Eleanor confessed. "I'm not ready yet to talk to him." "And you're right," Marcus advised. "Let him cool down. Hey, how about we meet tomorrow? We can talk about everything calmly. I could tell you more about the company, about how the board works. You're going to have to understand all of that." "Yes, that would be great." Eleanor nodded. "Thanks, Marcus, for always being good to me." "Hey, we're family," he simply replied. "A real family, not what Nathan tried to build." After speaking with Marcus, Eleanor felt a little more secure. At least she wasn't alone in this new and unknown life. As she stepped out onto the street, she took a deep breath of the evening air. Dusk was falling over the city. The streetlights were just beginning to light up. An evening of any summer. But for Eleanor Matthews, nothing was ordinary anymore. Her life had changed forever. She looked once more at the building where her workshop was, memorizing every detail of the facade, and smiled. Then she walked with a firm step towards the bus stop. She was expecting a conversation with her husband, which promised not to be easy, but Eleanor was no longer afraid. Whatever happened, now she had her own path. The house greeted Eleanor with an unusual silence. At that time, Nathan was usually already home with the television on full blast and demanding dinner. Today, instead, the apartment was dark and quiet, as if no one lived there. Eleanor turned on the hall light, took off her shoes, and went to the kitchen. She wanted tea, very hot and strong, to gather her thoughts before the inevitable confrontation with her husband. She put the water to boil and opened the refrigerator out of habit, thinking about what to make for dinner, but quickly stopped. Today had changed everything, including the old order of her family life. She would no longer be the submissive wife willing to please her husband in everything. The water had just begun to boil when the lock turned. Nathan's heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Eleanor stood up, ready for confrontation. Nathan appeared in the kitchen door, and Eleanor unintentionally noticed how much he had changed in just one day. Normally impeccable, now he was disheveled. His tie was crooked, his shirt untucked, his eyes red, either from tiredness or from alcohol. "You've already appeared," he spat instead of saying hello. "Where the hell were you?" "In the workshop all day," Eleanor replied calmly, pouring the tea into cups. "Do you want some?" "What workshop?" Nathan entered the kitchen and sat heavily in a chair. "What are you talking about? Your mother left me not only the shares," Eleanor sat opposite, surrounding the hot cup with her hands, "also a fully equipped workshop in the downtown area for restoration." "What?" Nathan looked at her incredulously. "Are you kidding?" "The workshop on Riverside Street. It's the place she bought 3 years ago." "Exactly," Eleanor nodded. "Riverside Street, 23, second floor." Nathan paled. She said it was an investment, that she was planning to open another store there. "Plans changed," Eleanor shrugged, trying to stay calm even though her heart was pounding in her throat. "Nathan, we need to talk seriously." "Talk about what?" He stood up abruptly, almost knocking over his chair. "My mother went crazy before she died. You took advantage of it. Now you think you're in charge here, right? That I'm going to dance to the rhythm you play for those 19%? "I didn't take advantage of anything," Eleanor replied firmly, "and I'm not going to force you to dance to anyone's tune. Nathan, let's be honest, our marriage has long been just a formality. And you live your life, you have Veronica." "Don't involve her in this," Nathan interrupted. "It's okay." Eleanor took a sip of tea, trying hard not to lose her cool. "I just want to say that we're both unhappy in this marriage. Maybe this is the opportunity to change everything. You are free. I am free. You can be with whoever you really want, and me, and you keep 30% of my business," he shouted. "From the business my mother built, from the business that belonged to me." "Your mother decided otherwise," Eleanor said softly, "and you know, I'm starting to understand why." "Enlighten me," Nathan spat with venom. "Because for you, it was always just money and status." Eleanor looked him straight in the eyes, and for her, something more. Art, beauty, history, what you never valued. Nathan let out a hollow laugh, devoid of any joy. What a moving speech. "Were you rehearsing it all day, or did Mom dictate it to you in her letter?" Eleanor shook her head. The conversation was getting tangled up. "Nathan, I'm not going to fight with you. I propose we resolve this in a civilized manner. If you want a divorce, I'm fine with that. You'll lose your 19%, but you'll be free. Isn't that what you wanted?" Nathan froze, staring at her with a new expression. Suddenly, he sank back into the chair and covered his face with his hands. "You don't understand," he muttered in a hushed voice. "It's not just about the shares. Without the control package, I can't run the company however I want. And if you and Marcus pool your stakes, you can block any decision of mine," Eleanor finished. "Yes, I understand. But is that so terrible? Is it so bad to listen to others from time to time?" Nathan raised his red eyes at her. "You don't know anything about business. You're a teacher, Eleanor. You know how to tell children about independence or revolution, but in business, you're a zero. In business management, maybe, Eleanor admitted. But I know more about restoration than you think. And most importantly, I'm willing to learn. And what does that mean? Nathan frowned. Nathan, your mother didn't make that will at random, Eleanor said softly. She wanted us to work together, for you to learn to appreciate what you have. Not just the money and power, but also the people around you. And she wanted me to learn to trust myself, to believe in my strength. Nathan snorted, but without the rage of before. That sounds like a cheap soap opera. Maybe, Eleanor smiled, but sometimes there is some truth in those stories. The two remained silent. The tick of the old wall clock, inherited from her grandmother, that Diego had always wanted to throw away, filled the kitchen. Outside, night fell and the first stars were appearing in the summer sky. "What do you propose?" Nathan finally asked, and for the first time in the entire conversation, there was no anger or sarcasm in his voice, just tiredness. "Let's take a break," Eleanor said. "Let's not decide anything hastily. You think about whether business control or freedom is more important to you. I will adapt to my role as co-owner, and within a month we'll sit down and decide how to continue." "And where are you going to live this month?" Nathan asked. Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't thought about that yet. The apartment was Nathan's. In fact, his parents had put it in his name before the wedding. She didn't have her own home or savings to rent. "I could stay with Martha," she said at last, remembering her old friend, a colleague from school. "Or in the workshop. There's a small break room. Maybe there for a while." "Don't talk nonsense," Nathan interrupted her. "I'm the one leaving. I'll stay in Mom's apartment for now. It's empty anyway." Eleanor looked at her husband in surprise. She hadn't expected such a generous gesture from him. "Are you sure?" "Please, Valeria, don't paint me as a monster," Nathan said tiredly. "I can be an imbecile, but not so much as to kick you out of the house." "Thanks," she said, suddenly moved. "You're welcome," he murmured, standing up. "I'm going to pack and leave today. I want to be alone and think things through." He headed to the door, but stopped at the threshold. "Do you know what the funniest thing is?" he said, without turning around. "I was really thinking of filing for divorce. Veronica and I were planning to get married in the fall. We had a date, September 21st. And now you have a choice," Eleanor said gently. "And that's good, Nathan. Choosing is always good." He nodded briefly and left. Eleanor heard him walking around the apartment, gathering things, as closet doors opened and closed, as keys jingled. Then the front door closed and the house was silent again. Eleanor stayed in the kitchen, finishing the cold tea, and thought about how strange it all had been. That morning, she was just Nathan Matthews' wife, a discreet shadow in the life of a successful entrepreneur. By nightfall, she had become co-owner of a large company, owner of a workshop, and perhaps one step away from being a free woman. Life, which seemed predictable until the last breath, suddenly became filled with uncertainty. And the funny thing was that uncertainty didn't scare her. On the contrary, it heated her blood like a glass of good wine. Eleanor got up, washed the cups, and went into the living room. She sat down on the sofa, and for the first time in many years, she put the television on the channel she wanted to watch, and not on the one Nathan used to choose. They were showing the old movie It's a Wonderful Life, and Eleanor smiled as she remembered seeing it as a child with her mother. The story of a man who, after trials, finds a new outlook on life, suddenly seemed surprisingly suited to her situation. And if life begins at 45, Eleanor thought, and for the first time in a long time, she let out a real laugh. The following weeks passed for Eleanor like a breath. The days were bursting at the seams. Meetings with Marcus, who informed her about the company's affairs, visiting the workshop where she ordered tools and materials, familiarizing herself with the team, conversations with lawyers about her rights and obligations as co-owner. Marcus proved to be an invaluable help. He patiently explained the complex structure of the company, the specifics of the antiques market, pricing principles, and much more. Eleanor absorbed knowledge like a sponge. To her own surprise, she discovered that she liked the business world, that she enjoyed understanding numbers and strategies. "You get it right away," Marcus told her after another meeting in which they reviewed the quarterly report. "Seriously, Eleanor, you are much more capable than you think." "Thank you," she smiled, somewhat embarrassed. "It's just that everything seems so interesting. I never thought the antiques business was a whole world with its own laws and rules." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "And you know what the most important thing is? It's a world where it's not just money that counts, but also passion, knowledge, respect for history. That's what Nathan always lacked." "And how is he?" Eleanor asked. "Have you seen him?" "Yes." Marcus frowned. "He stopped by the office last week. He doesn't look well. Haggard, nervous. We didn't talk much. He just gathered some papers and left." Eleanor sighed. Nathan hadn't called or been home since that night. She knew from his secretary that he worked from his mother's apartment, conducting meetings by phone and hardly seeing anyone. "Is Veronica with him?" she asked, surprised that she didn't feel pain when she said the name of her husband's lover. "I don't know." Marcus shook his head. "They say she doesn't show up at the office either. She asked for unpaid leave." They kept quiet, each one lost in their own thoughts. "And your workshop?" Marcus finally asked, changing the subject. "How's it going?" Eleanor's face lit up. "Wonderfully. I've got almost everything set up. I even restored a couple of small pieces as a test. I think in a week or two I could officially open." "Seriously?" Marcus rejoiced. "That's excellent. Hey, if you want, I can help you spread the word. I know a couple of journalists who could write about the new workshop, and we can post information on the company's website. After all, you're a co-owner now. It won't look bad." Eleanor hesitated. "The situation is unusual." "Forget that," Marcus gestured. "Business is business. Besides, Mom would have been happy to have her antique shops collaborate with a restoration workshop. It's logical." Eleanor smiled at him gratefully. With Marcus, everything was easy. He didn't see her as a threat or a rival, but rather as a kindred spirit, someone equally passionate about art. After meeting with Marcus, Eleanor went to the workshop. That place had already become her second home. She could spend hours there working on antique pieces, studying restoration books that she found on the shelves, or just thinking about the future. Today, she brought from home her grandmother's old box, the same one she was working on when Catherine surprised her. The box was almost ready. All that was left was to fix the restored lock and polish the surface. Eleanor put on her apron, turned on the special lamp, and immersed herself in the task. Time ceased to exist. There were only her hands, the tools, and the old wood that seemed to revive under her fingers, regaining a second life. She didn't hear the workshop door open. Only when she heard footsteps behind her did Eleanor start and turn around. Nathan was standing in the doorway. "Hello," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other with uncertainty. "I thought maybe we should talk." Eleanor took off her work gloves slowly and turned off the lamp. "Hello," she replied, looking closely at her husband. "Yes, I guess it's time." Nathan walked through the workshop, looking around curiously. For the first time, Eleanor saw him look at the antique pieces, not because of their price, but as if trying to understand their essence, their history. He stopped next to the work table where the half-finished box lay. "Is this that one?" he asked, carefully running his finger over the inlay. "The same one with which Mom surprised you?" "Yes," Eleanor nodded. "My grandmother's. It's over 100 years old." "A beautiful job," Nathan said unexpectedly. "I never noticed how interesting its details are." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. In 15 years of marriage, he had never been interested in her hobbies, much less in appreciating the beauty of an antique object. "You've changed," she observed. "Spending 3 weeks only thinking makes you realize a lot of things." Nathan shrugged. "Do you want a coffee?" "I saw that you have a coffee maker here." "Okay," Eleanor agreed, still not understanding where that conversation was going. "But I think I'm out of milk. I brought some." Nathan took a bag that Eleanor barely noticed at the time. A liter of milk, a bottle of cognac, and a box of chocolates. Your favorites. The imported ones, not the hated assorted kind, and good coffee. While he was busy with the coffee maker, Eleanor watched, trying to figure out what was going on. Nathan didn't look as impeccable as usual. Jeans instead of dress pants, a simple sweater instead of a shirt and tie, and even his attitude was different, as if he had lost some of that self-sufficiency that characterized him. Finally, the coffee was ready. They sat by the window and Nathan poured the aromatic drink into the cups, adding the exact amount of milk that Eleanor liked. A little, so the coffee would stay strong. "Do you remember how I like my coffee?" She was surprised. "I remember many things," Nathan said in a low voice. "I just didn't always pay attention to them." They remained silent, looking at the city at dusk. The first stars lit up over the rooftops, and in the distance music could be heard. Probably the band from the neighboring park playing like every Friday in the summer. "I'm not going to beat around the bush," Nathan finally said, putting down his cup. "These 3 weeks I've been thinking a lot about us, about the company, about what Mom said in her video. And you know what I understood?" Eleanor looked at him cautiously, not daring to assume. "I understood that she was right," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "I really never valued what I had, not the business she created, not you." Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. She would never have expected to hear those words from the man who always considered emotions a weakness. "I'm not going to apologize for all these years," Nathan continued. "I behaved like a bastard, and there's no excuse for how I treated you. But I want to stop looking for words. I want to try to fix it. If you let me." "Fix it?" Eleanor repeated. "What do you mean?" Nathan took a small box out of his pocket and placed it on the table between the two of them. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, confused. "Open it," he said. Eleanor opened it carefully. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small sapphire, exactly the same as the one he gave her when he proposed 20 years ago, and that she stopped using after childbirth when her fingers swelled up and Nathan never bothered to buy her a new one in her size. "I suggest we start over," Nathan said, looking into her eyes. "Not for the shares, not for the money, for us. Trying to rebuild what we destroyed all these years." Eleanor looked at the ring, not knowing what to say. 3 weeks ago, she would have given anything to hear those words. But now? "And Veronica?" she asked. Nathan sighed. "We broke up. Well, more like she dumped me as soon as she understood that I could lose 19% of the shares. It turns out that it wasn't so much my beautiful eyes that interested her, but my wallet." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said with sincerity. "No need," Nathan gave a bitter smile. "I deserve it. I spent my life measuring people with money, and in the end, they measured me the same." He took a sip of coffee and continued. "You know, I spoke with Marcus a few days ago. We really talked like we hadn't in years. He told me about you, how you get fully involved in the company's affairs, how quickly you learn, how your eyes light up when you talk about restoration." Nathan looked at the unfinished box, and then he remembered what you were like 20 years ago when we met. Just as passionate, just as enthusiastic. You were talking about your dreams, how you wanted to open a workshop, work with antiques. And you said that wasn't serious," Eleanor added in a low voice. "It was a housewife's hobby, not a real job." "Yes," Nathan nodded. "Just like when my father told my mother the same thing, and she listened to him, abandoned her dream, and regretted it all her life." He looked up, and Eleanor was surprised to see real pain in his eyes. "I don't want to repeat that mistake, Eleanor. I don't want to be like my father. I don't want you to leave what you love. Why? Because of the status of wife of a successful businessman?" Nathan laughed without joy. "Who, as you can see, isn't as successful without Mom and her contacts." Eleanor remained silent, unable to respond. Too many new emotions, too unexpected a recognition. "I'm not asking you to answer now," Nathan said, noticing her confusion. "Just think about it. Maybe Mom was right, and it really is worth trying again. True, this time on equal terms. He got up, finishing his coffee. "I'm leaving. I'm sure you have a lot of work. You can keep the ring in any case. It was always yours." Nathan headed for the door, but stopped halfway. "Oh, I almost forgot. Did you get the invitation to Monday's board meeting?" "Yes," Eleanor nodded. "Marcus said it is an important session. Presentation of the quarterly report and discussion of the strategy for next year." "Exactly," Nathan agreed. "I prepared a proposal to expand the network. I'd like you to check it out first. It has interesting ideas, including about integrating restoration workshops within the company's structure." He pulled from the same bag from which he had taken the milk and chocolates a thick folder of documents. "Everything is here. Read it when you have time, and call me if you want to discuss it." He left the folder on the table next to the little box with the ring. Then, after a brief hesitation, he leaned over and gave Eleanor a light kiss on the cheek, the first in many years. "Goodbye," he said softly, "and thank you for listening." When the door closed behind him, Eleanor remained motionless for a long time, caressing with her hand the place where his lips had touched. She finally pulled herself together, took a deep breath, and picked up the folder. "Matthews and Heritage Development Strategy for 2024 to 2025, it said on the first page. Eleanor began to read, and with each page, her eyebrows arched further. Nathan had really changed. His proposals were not just a set of numbers and graphs, as she expected. It was a complete vision that united the antiques business with a cultural mission of preserving historical heritage. He proposed opening in every large store in the network a small restoration workshop where customers could not only buy antiques, but also restore their family heirlooms. Moreover, he proposed creating an educational center where experienced restorers could share their knowledge with new generations. And to lead that center, he proposed her, Eleanor Matthews. Taking into account E. Matthews' pedagogical experience and restoration skills, Eleanor read, unable to believe her eyes, she is the perfect candidate for the position of director of the Educational Center for Restoration of Matthews and Heritage. Her 15 years of experience in teaching history, her deep understanding of the world of antiquities, and her rare talent for recovery of historical artifacts make her a unique specialist, capable not only of directing the center, but also defining its strategic development. Eleanor put the documents aside, feeling her head spinning. It wasn't just a business plan. It was a recognition of her value as a professional, as a person, something she had never received from Nathan in all her years of marriage. She took the ring box, opened it, and stared long at the sapphire that glittered under the desk lamp. Was it worth giving her marriage another opportunity, or was it another manipulation by Nathan who didn't want to lose control of the company? Eleanor didn't have the answer, but for the first time in many years, she felt she really had a choice. And that feeling was wonderful, intoxicating. By Monday, she had already made a decision. She had thought a lot, weighed the pros and cons, had spoken on the phone with Marcus, and had even consulted with her old friend Martha. And now, entering the spacious conference room of Matthews and Heritage's central office, she knew what she would say at the board meeting. Her appearance caused a noticeable stir. Before, she had only been there at a few corporate events where Nathan took her reluctantly, introducing her with a brief, "My wife." Now she arrived as a full co-owner, whose decisions the future of the company depended on. The board members, serious men and women in expensive suits, watched her with open interest. Eleanor was surprised to discover that she was not nervous as she had feared. On the contrary, she felt a strange calm and self-confidence. For that day, she chose a navy blue formal suit, purchased with her first payment for restoring an old neighbor's sideboard. Simple but elegant shoes with low heels and just the right amount of jewelry. Just pearl earrings, a gift from her mother on her 30th birthday. She wore her hair in a neat updo and almost imperceptible makeup, highlighting her natural beauty. Eleanor knew she looked flawless, discreet but with style. Marcus was waiting for her at the entrance to the hall. He was wearing his suit as always, but instead of the typical red power tie, he had chosen a gray one, the same color as Eleanor's eyes. Noticing this, she smiled involuntarily. "You came," he said, visibly relieved. "I was afraid you'd change your mind." "I'm a co-owner of the company," Eleanor replied calmly. "Of course I came." "Of course." Marcus nodded, and something like pride appeared in his eyes. "You read my proposals?" Nathan asked, approaching. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "A very interesting plan. Unexpected." "In a good way?" he asked. "In a very good sense," Eleanor said. "But I have some questions and suggestions. We'll talk about them after the session." "Of course," Nathan agreed. "By the way, today you are." He stopped, searching for words. "Very beautiful." "Thank you," she replied simply, and together they entered the hall. The meeting continued, reports, figures, graphs. Eleanor listened attentively, took notes. Occasionally asked questions that surprised those present with their precision and depth. She saw the expressions on the counselors' faces change from condescending interest to genuine respect. Finally, it was time to discuss the development strategy. Nathan stood up and presented his plan. He spoke with confidence and clarity, but without the arrogance of before. It was the speech of someone who truly believed in what he was proposing, not someone who was just looking to impress. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one of the directors, a sharp-eyed older man, asked, "Your proposal is interesting, Nathan, but it requires a large investment. Are you sure the educational center will be profitable?" "If you allow me, I'll answer," Eleanor intervened, almost without realizing it. Everyone looked at her and she continued. "The question is not just immediate profitability. This center is an investment in the company's reputation for the future. We don't just sell antiques, we preserve cultural heritage, and for that we need qualified specialists, which are becoming fewer and fewer." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Besides, a center like this will attract a new audience, young people interested in history and traditional crafts. This will broaden the customer base and will rejuvenate it. In the long term, it is just what the company needs to remain relevant in a changing world." The room fell silent again, but now it was a different kind of silence, the silence of surprise and respect. "Valeria is right," Marcus finally said from across the table. "I support this proposal, and if we're going to vote, my vote is in favor." "Me too," Victoria added, surprising Eleanor more than anyone. Mom would have approved of this approach. "I move to vote," said the council president. "Who is in favor of the strategy presented?" All hands went up, unanimously. "It is approved," President announced. "Nathan, Eleanor, congratulations. Your proposal has been accepted." After the session, Eleanor was surrounded by the counselors. They wanted to meet her, exchange contacts, propose meetings to discuss details. She responded calmly and confidently, surprising herself with how comfortable she felt in that role. When everyone had left in the conference room, there were only her and Nathan. He looked at her with a new expression, a mixture of respect, amazement, and something else Eleanor couldn't quite put her finger on. "You were magnificent," he said. "Seriously, Eleanor, I didn't even imagine you knew so much about business." "Neither did I," she admitted, "but I discovered that I like it and that I'm not that bad at this." "Bad?" Nathan shook his head. "You were brilliant. Everyone was charmed by you, even Moreno, and he never gets excited about anyone." Eleanor smiled, feeling a blush on her cheeks. It was the first sincere compliment she had heard from her husband in many years. "Do you want lunch?" Nathan asked. "I know a really good restaurant." "Let's go for a coffee," Eleanor suggested. "The one where the hamburgers taste like the school cafeteria, remember? We went there when we were just starting out." Nathan looked at her in surprise. "Memories? Does it still exist?" "Yes," Eleanor nodded. "I go often. Everything is the same as before. The hamburgers, the milkshakes." "Then let's go there." Nathan accepted with unexpected ease. "It's been ages since I've eaten a real hamburger." They left the office together, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor didn't feel like a mere appendage to her husband. She walked beside him just like him, confident, knowing what she wanted out of life. "Thank you, Catherine," she thought, looking up at the summer sky. "You really gave me the chance at a new life, and it seems not just me." "Do you remember how we met?" Nathan asked, biting into a piece of hamburger. They were at Memories, at the same table next to the window where Eleanor used to correct notebooks. Rosa, seeing them together, lit up with a big smile and served them with special care. She even brought out some antique porcelain cups with gold trim from some hidden place instead of the usual ones. "Of course I remember." Eleanor smiled. "The treasures of the Colonial Estates exhibition at the Historical Museum. I was there with my students, and you, and I had gone with Mom, who was looking for pieces for her new store," Nathan finished. "And I immediately noticed the young teacher who spoke about the antique objects with such passion that even the adults were listening. You came up after the visit and said you'd never heard someone speak about furniture with such excitement." Eleanor laughed, remembering it. "And you invited me to this very cafe, and you accepted, although you didn't normally go out with strangers," Nathan added. "You said you couldn't resist hamburgers." "They were truly irresistible," Eleanor sighed playfully. "And you too?" They smiled, and for a moment, Eleanor felt like they had gone back 20 years, young, in love, full of dreams. "What happened to us, Nathan?" she asked in a low voice. "When did we lose what was between us?" Nathan thought for a moment, stirring the coffee with the spoon. "I guess that's when I started taking you for granted, when I thought you would never leave, that I could behave however I wanted, when I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as part of the furniture." He looked up and Eleanor saw genuine regret in his eyes. "I was blinded by money, status, power. I thought that what was important was external success, recognition, what is measured by figures or can be bought with money, and everything else wasn't worth it." "And that's why Veronica appeared?" Eleanor asked without beating around the bush. Nathan sighed. Veronica was a symptom, not the cause. "I was already empty inside when I met her. She only reflected what I had become." "A pretty facade, perfect for a man like me." "You're not being fair to yourself," Eleanor said gently. "You're not empty. You're just lost a little. You were always nicer than I deserved." Nathan shook his head. "Even now, after everything I did, you still find kind words for me." They kept silent. Outside, an old bus passed by, reminding Eleanor of that day she went to the workshop after reading Catherine's letter. "And you?" Nathan suddenly asked. "Why did you put up with it all? Why didn't you leave?" Eleanor thought about it. It was a question she had asked herself many times over the past few years. At first there was love, then custom, then the fear of change, and also, I suppose, the hope that one day you'd be the Nathan I fell in love with again. "And now?" he asked softly. "That hope lives on?" Eleanor looked at him for a long time. "I don't know, Nathan. I really don't know. Too much water under the bridge. There has been too much pain. But? He leaned forward, hanging on every word. "But I see you're changing, and I'm intrigued as to where it will lead. That's it." Nathan smiled slightly. "You know, that's enough for me. For now, that's enough." They finished the burgers, drank the coffee, paid the bill, and went outside. The day was clear, warm, perfect for walking. By silent agreement, they walked through the familiar streets towards the city park, where they used to stroll around in the old days. "I saw your workshop project," Nathan said as they passed by an ancient fountain. "It's impressive, especially the idea of workshops for children." "Thank you," Eleanor smiled. "I thought it could be part of our center's educational program. Bringing children closer to history through material culture. Teach them to value manual work and the beauty of antique objects." "Excellent idea," Nathan agreed. "In fact, I spoke to Sarah in marketing. They are ready to create the brand image of your workshop. The website, all the advertising material, paid for by the company, of course. But why? Eleanor was surprised. I was thinking of opening a small private workshop, my own business. And I think your workshop could be the flagship project of our network, Nathan said. The first model of what restoration centers in our stores should be like. Of course, if you agree. Eleanor stopped, impressed with the proposal. Are you proposing I run an entire network of restoration workshops? Exactly. Nathan nodded. Who could do it better than you? You have the knowledge, the talent, the teaching experience, and above all, the true love for antique pieces, for the history they hold. Eleanor didn't know what to say. A month ago, she wouldn't have even dreamed of such a turn in her life. Think about it, Nathan said, seeing her bewilderment. Don't answer now. They continued walking and soon came to a playground where children were laughing on swings and slides under the gaze of their mothers and grandmothers. Remember when we brought little Alexander here? Eleanor asked, looking at the children. He loved those swings. Of course I remember. Nathan nodded with a hint of sadness. It's a shame that I rarely made the time. Always work, and he grew so fast. Speaking of Alexander, Eleanor remembered. You called him? You told him about Grandma's will? Yes, Nathan sighed. He said that it was none of his business, that he only cared about his share of the inheritance, a true son of his father. There wasn't that much bitterness in his voice that Eleanor couldn't resist and touched his hand gently. He's still young, Nathan. Give him time. Maybe he'll mature and change, like you. I hope so. Nathan smiled sadly. I don't want him to repeat my mistakes. They arrived at a small ice cream shop and suddenly Nathan asked, Do you want an ice cream cone like before? Eleanor laughed with pleasure, surprised that he remembered that little detail of their past. They bought ice cream and sat on a bench by the pond, watching the ducks that swam with important airs from one side to the other, asking for crumbs of bread from the visitors. You know, Nathan suddenly said, it's been years since I felt like this. Calm. As if I had taken off a heavy backpack that I carried for years. I understand you, Eleanor nodded. I feel something similar, like I can finally breathe deeply. And do you think we have a chance? He asked cautiously. Not to go back to the past, that's impossible, but to build something new, something real. Eleanor looked at the water for a long time, the reflections of the sun on its surface, the ducks floating by. Then she took out of her bag the little box with the ring that Nathan had left her days ago. I'm not ready to put it on right away, she said in a low voice. There was too much pain, too many wounds, but I'm willing to try it step by step. Nathan covered her hand with his. That's all I can ask for, a chance to prove that I can be better, that we can be better together. The following months passed for Eleanor like a single day. So much was happening at the same time that at times she could hardly catch her breath. Her workshop on Riverside Street opened in mid-September and soon attracted attention. An article in the city magazine, a report on local television, the advertising campaign organized by the company's marketing department. It all paid off. The customers arrived one after another, bringing old pieces to restore or asking for advice. Particularly successful were the workshops for children that Eleanor gave on weekends. The students enthusiastically learned the basics of restoration, listened to stories about old objects, tried their hands at wood and varnishes. The workshop, little by little, became not only a workplace, but also a cultural center. Meetings were held there with historians, collectors, master restorers. Eleanor radiated happiness at seeing her long-held dream come true. At the same time, the company's Restoration Education Center project was progressing. Eleanor was actively involved in the creation of programs, in the selection of teachers, in the preparation of facilities. It was not easy, considering that she was still teaching at the school, albeit with reduced hours. The relationship with Nathan progressed slowly but steadily. He did not move back home, preferring to give her space and time. They saw each other several times a week, in a cafe, in the park, in the workshop. They talked, rediscovered each other, learned to listen to each other. Sometimes they argued, because old wounds are not forgotten so easily, but now they knew how to talk about their feelings, find compromises, respect each other's limits. At work, they had also become a true team. Nathan, to the surprise of many, turned out to be an excellent CEO, but no longer a lone dictator. He had learned to listen to the opinions of others, including Eleanor's, whose fresh perspective on the business was invaluable. One November afternoon, when the first snowfall covered the city in a blanket of white, Nathan invited Eleanor to dinner. Not in a luxurious restaurant of the business elite, as he used to do before, but in a cozy Italian place where it smelled of freshly baked bread and live music was playing. "I have a surprise for you," he said when they finished the main course. "Well, actually, 2 surprises." "I don't know if I'm ready for surprises," Eleanor smiled. "The last surprise in our family changed my whole life. I hope these ones you'll like." Nathan smiled, taking an envelope out of the inside pocket of his jacket. "Look." Eleanor opened the envelope and took out 2 plane tickets. "Paris?" she asked in astonishment. "For Christmas?" "Yes." Nathan nodded. "I thought we'd never been there together. And you always dreamed of seeing the Louvre, the Orsay Museum, Versailles. Besides, there are amazing antique shops and flea markets there." "But," Eleanor was stunned, "we've never been on vacation together, alone. You always said it was a waste of time." "I've said many things," Nathan interrupted her gently, "and I regret many of them now. I want to recover what I lost, if you'll allow me." Eleanor looked at the tickets in disbelief. Christmas in Paris. It was like fulfilling an old dream she had buried. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's a wonderful gift. And here goes the second." Nathan handed her a small velvet box. Eleanor's heart raced. Could it be? She opened the box. Inside was not an engagement ring, as she had expected, but a delicate brooch in the shape of a small antique box, set with tiny sapphires. "It's an antique piece from the early 20th century, Nathan explained. "I found it in one of our stores and immediately thought of you. It represents a new beginning, a new page in our life. Do you accept it?" Eleanor took the brooch carefully. It was beautiful. Fine work, elegant, sober design, full of meaning. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Of course I accept it." Nathan helped her pin it to the lapel of her jacket, his fingers lingering for a moment on her shoulder. "Are you happy, Eleanor?" he asked suddenly. "Now, in this new life?" Eleanor reflected. Was she happy after all the changes, all the ups and downs of those months? "Yes," she finally responded. Not with the light happiness of a 20-year-old, but with the deep, conscious happiness of an adult who knows the value of every day, of every moment. She looked at him and added, "And do you know what's the most surprising thing? I'm grateful to your mom for everything she did, for everything that forced us to change, because without it, we would remain in our golden cage, never knowing what true freedom means." Nathan covered her hand with his own. "I am also grateful to her for having saved us both from ourselves." They smiled at each other, and in that instant Eleanor understood. Whatever happened next, however her life developed, she would never regret having received that unexpected opportunity to be happy, the opportunity to be herself, to find her voice, her strength. "For a new beginning," Nathan proposed, raising his glass. "For a new beginning," Eleanor repeated, and their glasses clinked together with a melodious sound that promised a new and better chapter in their story. "Good morning, Eleanor," smiled a young woman as she entered the workshop with a tray containing 2 cups of coffee. "I brought her Americano, just the way she likes it." Eleanor looked up from her work on an antique secretary desk that had been brought from the city museum to restore. "You are my salvation," she laughed. "I was so focused that I forgot the time. Exactly 2 years had passed since that day in the office of the notary Harrison Caldwell, when the words that changed Eleanor Matthews' life were spoken. 2 years full of changes, discoveries, difficulties, and joys. The Riverside Street Workshop was no longer just a workplace. It had become the center of an entire network of restoration studios open next to the main stores of the Matthews and Heritage Company. And the Restoration Education Center, directed by Eleanor, had already graduated its first generation of young specialists, some of whom had returned as her assistants. Laura, a recent graduate of the Faculty of History, was one of the most talented. Eleanor saw in her a younger version of herself, the same spark, the same love for the antique objects and their stories. Marcus called, Laura reported, arranging the cups on the small table by the window. He said he's half an hour late, something with a shipment of old watches from Switzerland. It's okay, Eleanor agreed. We have time to spare. Today was Catherine's death anniversary, and the whole family would gather at the cemetery and then lunch at a small restaurant. In those 2 years, much had changed not only in the life of Eleanor, but also in the relationship between the Matthews family. Marcus became closer to Eleanor and Nathan, often visited their home, helped with the business, and supported them genuinely. Victoria, initially suspicious, eventually softened towards her sister-in-law, especially after Eleanor helped her daughter enter an art school after discovering her talent for textile restoration. Even Alexander, Eleanor, and Nathan's son, who was initially skeptical about the family changes, began to transform. After finishing university in Barcelona, he decided not to stay in Europe as he had planned, but to return home and join the family business. Now he was doing a rotating internship through different departments of the company to get to know it from the inside. Eleanor looked at her watch. There was still time until the meeting with the family, and she could finish a particularly complex section of the secretary desk. She put on her glasses with magnifying lenses and returned to the painstaking work of reconstructing the inlay. The past and the present intertwined in her life like the design of the antique furniture she restored. Sometimes, especially in those moments of total immersion, it seemed to her that Catherine herself was watching her from somewhere, nodding approvingly. The workshop door opened again, but this time Nathan came in. He was wearing a suit without a tie, with a bouquet of white roses, his mother's favorite flowers. "Hello," he said, kissing Eleanor on her cheek. "Am I interrupting you?" "I'm finishing," she smiled, taking off her glasses. "You arrived early today." "I moved a couple of meetings," Nathan explained, sitting on the edge of the table. "I wanted to pick you up so we could go to the cemetery together." Eleanor watched him with attention. In those 2 years, he had changed not only inside, but also outside. The haughtiness in his bearing had disappeared, and new wrinkles had appeared around his eyes, wrinkles of smiles, not tension. He was even starting to go gray, and that first gray hair, curiously, made him more attractive. Their relationship had also been through a lot. There were times when it seemed impossible to overcome the past, that the pain and resentments were too deep, but they didn't give up. They worked on themselves and on each other. Nathan even went to a psychologist, a decision that would have previously seemed ridiculous. "If I can hire a coach for the body, why not for the soul?" he said then. Half a year ago, he finally returned home and began to live together again, no longer as strangers under the same roof, but as true partners, equals in everything. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, noticing her gaze. "On us," Eleanor replied bluntly. "How much everything has changed in these 2 years. For the better?" A certain insecurity that wasn't there before appeared in his voice. "Definitely for the better." She smiled, placing her hand on top of his. On her finger, the sapphire ring shone, the same one he had given her for the proposal years before, and which she had started using again since last New Year's. They exchanged knowing glances. Without words that were no longer necessary. "And how is the new project going?" Nathan asked, pointing at the plans spread out on the table next to them. "It's moving forward," Eleanor replied enthusiastically. "We've almost finalized the layout. If everything goes according to schedule, we'll be able to open the workshop for children with special needs this fall." It was their joint project, a social initiative focused on inclusion and vocational guidance of children with disabilities. The idea was born in Eleanor after meeting a child with autism who showed amazing woodworking skills. Nathan fully supported her, allocating space and resources from the company's budget. Excellent, Nathan agreed. I spoke with the Department of Culture. They are willing to include us in the program to support traditional trades. That will give us additional funding and recognition. That's fantastic. Eleanor was really happy. We'll be able to welcome more children. That's exactly what I thought. Nathan smiled. Eleanor looked at him with tenderness. How much he had changed. Before, the only thing that interested him in any project was profit and prestige. Now he was happy from his heart for the opportunity to help those in need. Of course, Nathan continued being a full-fledged businessman. He still knew how to count every penny, negotiate with toughness, and make difficult decisions. But now, behind the numbers and contracts, he saw people, destinies, their joys and their sorrows. It's time, Nathan said, looking at his watch. I'm sure Marcus is already waiting for us at the entrance. Eleanor nodded, took off her work apron, and put on a light coat. June had arrived fresh, and saying goodbye to Laura, she walked with her husband to the street. Marcus was indeed waiting for them. He was leaning against his car. When he saw Eleanor and Nathan, he waved. I thought you would be late, he said, hugging his sister-in-law first and then his brother. As always, up to your neck in work. As always, Eleanor agreed. I'm restoring a secretary desk from the museum. It is a beauty. Walnut, mother-of-pearl inlay, bronze metal fittings. That's right, Nathan rolled his eyes jokingly. She starts talking about work and she won't stop. Look who's talking, Eleanor laughed, and who last night spent 2 hours telling us about his new idea for displaying the windows. Touché, Nathan admitted, raising his hands in playful surrender. Let's go, lovebirds, Marcus interrupted them. Or we're going to be late and Victoria won't forgive us. She's in a solemn mood today. They got in the car and headed to the cemetery where Catherine was buried. On the way, Eleanor looked out the window at the city that passed by, so familiar and at the same time new, as if she saw it with different eyes. Much had changed in those 2 years. She left school and dedicated herself entirely to restoration and the educational center. She moved with Nathan to a new, spacious apartment, but without the ostentation of their old house. She made new friends, regained ties with others that she had lost when she completely devoted herself to family life. But the main thing was that she herself had changed. From a quiet and insecure woman, accustomed to settling for little, she became a strong and independent person who knew her worth. And still, she didn't become tough, neither cynical nor authoritarian. On the contrary, by finding her inner strength, she learned to value the simple joys of life, friendship, love, the beauty of the world around her. At the cemetery, they were already waiting. Victoria with her husband and daughter, and also, to Eleanor's surprise, Alexander, who was supposed to arrive that evening. Son, Eleanor hugged him without hiding her joy. You said you'd be late. I wanted to surprise you. Alexander smiled, hugging his mother. Then he shook his father's hand and gave a pat on his uncle's shoulder. Eleanor looked at her son tenderly. 23 years old, tall, handsome, so similar to Nathan in his youth physically, but luckily with a different character. The last 2 years had also changed him. He'd become more serious, more responsible, and he had learned to value his family and his roots. Together, they approached Catherine's grave. The monument was sober but elegant. Black granite, a simple inscription, a small relief with the image of an open book. Nathan placed the bouquet of white roses, and everyone remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor gazed at the portrait of her mother-in-law on the tombstone, her face stern, her gaze direct, a slight half-smile. That's how she remembered her, authoritative, determined, without tolerating objections. Who would have imagined that that woman who seemed so cold and calculating in reality kept so much unexpressed love and so many unspoken dreams in her soul? "Thank you," Eleanor said silently, looking at the portrait. "Thank you for everything, for seeing in me what I myself did not see, for giving me a chance, for saving not only me, but also your son. I hope you're proud of us now." It seemed to her that a soft breeze that shook the trees of the cemetery whispered in reply, "I am proud." After the cemetery, they went to the restaurant, the same place where they once celebrated Catherine's 70th birthday, her last birthday. Sitting around a large round table, they recalled her life, not only the last months overshadowed by illness, but a whole existence full of struggles, victories, mistakes, and wisdom. "You know," Marcus suddenly said, raising his glass, "Mom always said that the most important thing in life is to leave a mark, not just money or property, but something more, changing the life of at least one person for the better." He scanned the table. "I think she did much more than that. She transformed the lives of all of us." "And not only did she transform us," Nathan added, "she gave us the opportunity to be better than we were, the opportunity to correct mistakes, to find our vocation, to achieve true happiness. And I am thankful for that. For Mom," Nathan said, raising his glass. "For Grandma," Alexander added. "For Catherine," Eleanor whispered. They toasted, and the conversation flowed towards other topics: company matters, new projects, plans for the future. Victoria talked about her daughter's achievements at art school, Marcus about his new exhibition, Alexander about his internship in Barcelona. Nathan and Eleanor talked about the charity project for children with special needs. "And what happened to that museum idea?" Alexander suddenly asked, turning to his father. "Didn't you say that you wanted to open a restoration museum within the company?" "Yes, your mom and I are working on the proposal," Nathan agreed. "We want to create a space where not only ancient pieces are displayed, but also the process of their restoration. Let people see how much effort, knowledge, and love is put into each historical object. And name it after Grandma?" Alexander clarified. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "Catherine Matthews Restoration Museum. We believe that she would have liked it." "No doubt," Marcus smiled. "It's exactly what she would have liked to leave as a legacy." At the end of lunch, when everyone began to say goodbye, Alexander approached Eleanor and hugged her tightly. For real, like he hadn't done in years. "You know, Mom," he said in a low voice, just so she would hear it, "I'm proud of you, of what you've done, of who you've become, and I'm glad you and Dad are back together, truly together." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears at her son's unexpected words. "Thank you, son," she whispered. "That means a lot to me." On the way home, she and Nathan traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It had been an emotionally charged day, and both felt a pleasant tiredness. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked when they were already approaching their home. "In life," Eleanor replied, "in the strange way that sometimes it takes unexpected turns. Who would have said 2 years ago that everything would change like this? Do you regret it?" he asked in a low voice. "Not 1 second," Eleanor answered firmly. "And you?" "I only regret not having understood before the treasure I had," Nathan said seriously. "Of the lost years." "They were not lost," Eleanor replied sweetly. "It was just another chapter in our lives. Not the happiest, yes, but without it, this new chapter wouldn't exist." Nathan parked in front of the house, but he didn't rush to get out. "You know, I was thinking," he said, turning to Eleanor, "what if we renew our vows? Celebrate 20 years of marriage, not just with a dinner or a trip, but for real, as if we're signing a new pact based on what we are now." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. She would never have expected such a proposal. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," Nathan agreed. "We could do it with family, just the closest ones, or with more people if you want. A party in colonial style, considering your love for the antique." Eleanor laughed. "A colonial style party? You, the man who always hated costume parties?" For you, anything, Nathan said seriously. I want you to be happy, truly happy. Eleanor observed him. His temples grayed, the wrinkles around his eyes, his features hardened by age. It was the same Nathan she had once fallen in love with, and at the same time a different man. Wiser, warmer, more human. I'm already happy, she said softly, but I like the idea. Just without costumes, please. Just us, our family, our friends, and our sincere vows from the heart. Deal. Nathan smiled. He leaned over and kissed her with tenderness, as in those early days of their story when the whole world seemed full of possibilities and hopes. Eleanor reciprocated the kiss, feeling her heart fill with warmth. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but it had led her right to where she needed to be, to herself, to her vocation, her happiness. Getting out of the car, they held hands and walked toward the house. The sunset sun gilded the treetops. In the distance, music played and a gentle breeze carried the scent of the linden trees in bloom. A summer afternoon in the lives of two people who had finally found their path, towards each other and towards themselves. Thank you, Catherine, Eleanor repeated in silence, looking at the sunset sky, for the unexpected inheritance that turned out to be much more than money or shares, for the chance of a true life. And it seemed to her that a gentle breeze whispered back in reply, "Be happy, Eleanor. Live a full life. That is the greatest legacy one person can leave another." If you like this story, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Your support inspires us every day to continue sharing new and exciting stories. On the main screen, you can now find our next story. We wish you all the best and much happiness in your lives.